Hi, all you wonderful VITA volunteers. My name is Jim Simpson, and on behalf of the Central Arizona VITA Network, the City of Phoenix, and Masters of Coin, we are going to create a series of videos that covers all of the tax law training that we conduct in our face-to-face live training sessions. This first video, which we'll entitle 1A, will cover several of the topics that we originally covered in the Link and Learn video training. So if you've watched that video training, you may want to skip through this video 1A and also a couple of succeeding videos, 1B and 2A, because these videos will go into much more detail than the original one did, but it will be somewhat duplicative. So we've created chapters at the bottom of this video in the description section. You can skip through to the different chapters to see how much of this you need to go. But then the succeeding videos will cover in-depth details of the tax law training that we provide to our VITA volunteers. So with that said, let's get started. I will share my screen here, and we will get started right here with our tax law training. So this is the general course outline for, there's generally 6 sessions that we do in a live training. We'll split these up so that we're doing, probably there'll be about 10 videos that we'll split up in here. This one we'll call 1A. We're going to talk about the introductions, the volunteer standards of conduct, how you log in, how you take the volunteer standards of conduct test, and then we'll stop this video and then we'll start 1B, which will be talking about practice lab and how to get into TaxSlayer, which is the software that we're going to use, and then how to do the first return. As I said, if you've looked at the first Link and Learn video, that covered some of these topics very quickly. We'll go into a lot more detail here, but I'll leave it up to you whether how much of this to skip. Then in the second one, we'll talk about the intake and quality review test, which again, we covered that in the Link and Learn video that you may or may not have watched. Okay. But here again, we'll go into much more detail. But then the second part of that video, 2B, is where we really start hitting in depth about tax law training, filing status, dependents, income, business income. And then the third session, and we'll split that up into 3A and 3B, we'll start talking about retirement income and capital gains and adjustments to income. And then the fourth session, again, we'll split that up into 2. We'll talk about standard and itemized deductions, and we'll begin to start talking about credits. Then in the 5th session, we'll talk about the Affordable Care Act, miscellaneous forms, other taxes. Again, we may or may not split that up into 2 videos. The 6th one we'll definitely just do all in one, where we're talking about customer service, the quality site requirements. We'll review the test, although throughout all of these sessions we'll be interlacing the test requirements in there. So let's get kind of going. This session 1 agenda. We won't do many introductions because this isn't a webinar format. We don't have students to introduce themselves, but and I've already introduced. I'll give a little brief introduction of myself and my credentials too. Then we'll talk about the volunteer standards of conduct, how to get into Link and Learn, and how to take that volunteer standards of conduct test. That's what this video is going to cover. The video 1B will then start talking about these topics here. So here's kind of an overview of all these tests. Now, for those of you who are just starting into this and didn't really watch that Link and Learn video, let me go over the test a little bit. So first of all, a lot of students, they get very put off when they think, oh, I've got to take these certification tests. First of all, every volunteer has to take these first two tests right here, the volunteer standards of conduct and the intake and interview and quality review. These are not very difficult tests, especially this first one. I call it the ethics test, is really basically just common sense. But we're going to go over those things. These are not hard to take, but every volunteer, even if you just come and you're going to be greeting clients, you need to take these first two tests. These are the prerequisite tests for then taking any of the tax law test. We want all of our volunteers to take the advanced tax law, all of the volunteers who are preparing returns. We want them to get certified at this level, at the advanced level. I'll briefly talk about some of these other things that are kind of grayed out. There's a test for professionals, CPAs, enrolled agents, and attorneys. They can take this test, and that certifies them to prepare returns at any site. We even really encourage those volunteers to just take this advanced test. Now, you may be looking, there's also a couple of tests over here if you're going to help foreign students. That's a specialized training that won't get covered in these sessions, but talk with your site coordinator if you want to take that test, and we'll help you with it. And then if you are a site coordinator, you've got to take the site coordinator exam. Now, down here, you may be looking at these and thinks, well, I don't want to take the advanced. I just want to take the basic test. I just want to do simple returns. First of all, your site coordinator is not going to ask you to prepare any return that you're not comfortable preparing. So if you get a client sitting in front of you and you think, oh, well, this is really beyond what I need to do, just talk with your site coordinator. We'll kind of have somebody else do that return and then help you with the things that you didn't feel comfortable doing with. But instead of just taking this basic exam, which trust me, is really not that much easier than the advanced, we really would like, and we're going to train to this advanced exam. And we encourage you to take the advanced exam, but we'll never ask you to do a return that you're not comfortable doing with. There's a couple of other ones down here, Puerto Rico. I've never even taken those. Some of us will take the military exam because we may get a few military folks in there. And also there's sometimes, and this is the only case where we will ever do a rental property, is if we have a military personnel who got stationed someplace else and they have to rent out their house, we'll help them with that. But in general, we don't do rental properties. Okay, so that's kind of there's also an international one. These are specialized ones that usually we'll get a few volunteers that'll certify in that. And if we do get somebody who's an international, it has an international return, we'll help them with that. But these are more very specialized ones. These are the three that we're going to teach to right here. Volunteer standards of conduct, intake and interview and quality review, and the advanced thing. So with that, let's get started. As I said, every volunteer has to complete every year. They have to complete the standards of conduct training and test, the intake and interview and quality review test. And if you're going to prepare returns, we want you to take the advanced certification test. You can see here where we've got these publications. There's this publication 4961, the publication 5101, and these were the publications I referred back to in that intake and interview. I'm sorry, that Link and Learn video that we created that kind of helped you, some of you, we wanted you to take those tests before you attended a live training. You may have already looked at these publications. I'm not going to go over them now. But then there's this publication 6744. This is, here, let me back up just a minute. We've talked about all those tests, that previous slide that we talked about. And a lot of students, they get kind of freaked out about having to take tests. Let me talk about these tests for just a second. First of all, you're going to take the test and you only have to get 80% on it to pass. You can miss a few and it's okay. Second of all, if you do fail it, you get a second shot at it. So you get a second shot at it. And if you do happen to fail it, talk with your instructor or site coordinator. We're going to make sure that you don't fail it the second time. We're not going to give you the answers, but we're going to make sure that you know where to go find the correct information. And in fact, all of these tests, they're really not trying to test you if you've become an expert on all of this stuff. Trust me, I've been preparing taxes for 30 years. I'm a CPA, and nobody knows it all. And everybody makes mistakes on that. These tests are just geared towards making sure you have a commitment to this program and you can learn where to go look things up. So that leads me to the third thing about these tests, is that they're open book. You can go look at any of these materials, and we're going to show you through here how to find all of these materials and where to find the answers for that. And then the fourth thing is they give you the questions beforehand. That's what's in this publication right here, 6744. So let's took it, and then this is a site where the tests are taken on. And by the way, I need to remove something right here. This taxes shouldn't be in there. They've changed the certification site, but most of my other slides have the correct version on here. So every year, you're going to take at least those first two exams and probably the third, and then you're going to complete this form 13615, which is we refer to as the volunteer agreement. That volunteer agreement's got to be signed and dated. The name on it, this is important, the name must match your photo ID, and your site coordinator is going to look at your photo ID and make sure that this form that you sign, this 13615, matches it. That form is going to show which test you passed and which certification level that you can work at. And the site coordinator's got to sign this, and they keep a copy because IRS will sometimes come by our sites and do a quality review of our sites and inspect them, kind of do it. So here are some resources. This is one of the ones you're going to use the most. It's called the Pub 4012. We just refer to it as the 4012. It's the Volunteer Resource Guide. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. There's also something called the Interactive Tax Assistant on irs.gov. That's a pretty handy tool when you really are just kind of trapped into, you can't really figure out, well, who's this dependent supposed to be a dependent of? Is it the mom or the grandma that they live in grandma's house? Who gets to claim them? And this interactive tax assistant, you can go in and start typing in details and answering questions, and it'll give you the answer right there. There's also Publication 17. This is an abbreviated publication, but it's got a lot of good information, and every site has to have access to that Pub 17. I will tell you from a personal note, I prefer some of the other resources because the Pub 17 just sometimes leaves you with more questions than answers for that. Because as I said, it's kind of an abbreviated site. Your site coordinator is a great reference. I would also tell you your other volunteers. We work at these sites and we'll find some volunteers, they get really interested in a certain topic and they kind of become little mini experts in that topic. At one of the sites I run at Scottsdale Community College, we have Tricia, and she's just kind of an expert on educational credits. And so we sometimes go tap her, right? But your site coordinator is also a real good reference to help you. You've got these PowerPoint training slides. There's also, if you're a City of Phoenix volunteer, or even if you're not a City of Phoenix volunteer, this is a public site. You know, you may be in Connecticut looking at these videos. You could go here to phoenix.gov/tax-help, and there's a lot of information on that site. TaxSlayer has a chat function within the return, but that's only for preparers that can do it. And there's a volunteer hotline, but again, that's only for volunteers only. So here is the 4491. And when I teach this class live, I tell my students, this is kind of like your textbook. It's a pretty thick book, although it's only available digitally. We used to give these to our volunteers years ago when the IRS had more money and more resources, but they've been continually cutting down on that. And now you'll have to access this digitally. It's very easy to find. Just go into a browser and type in Pub 4491, it'll give you can download it. It's about 350 pages, but it's a real good publication if you've just got more questions than were covered in this training. Or remember, I referenced a moment ago that Pub 4012. That one we do give you a printed copy of, and that will be your handbook. That's your volunteer resource guide. But again, it just kind of hits these topics, superficially, if you will. This Pub 4491 will go into a lot more detail. So it's a good one to have handy that you can go search. Okay. Here's the Pub 4012, and you as a volunteer, you'll get a copy of this in a hard copy, and you'll probably find at the end of the tax season, it's all marked up and there's little post-it notes on everything and flags on stuff where this is your handy go-to guide. You will use this a lot. Here's the test booklet. Remember a moment ago I told you that we give you all of the questions for all of the tests. And then if you have to retake the test, there's a second set of questions that are the retest questions. So, if you take it the first time and you don't get an 80% on it, be sure to get with your instructor or your site coordinator so we can help you figure out where you went wrong. Now, let me stop right here, and this is really important. When you do go take this test on the Link and Learn site, which we're going to go over in a minute, you'll get done with the test. You only get one shot at figuring out it'll tell you what you got wrong and what you got right. So right then and there, be sure to capture which questions you got wrong. And by the way, as a volunteer, we do give you a hard copy of this book. I encourage all of my students, take the test in the book, circle your answers, right? And then go take it on Link and Learn. And then if you got something wrong, go back in the book and flag them that you got it wrong. It's not going to tell you what the right answer is. It's just going to tell you got it wrong. And here, go look in these publications, the ones I just showed you, right? To figure out why you got it wrong. And mark those in your booklet, and then talk with your instructor or site coordinator, because when you go take it again, we want to make sure you pass it the second time. Okay. So here's that site, phoenix.gov tax help, and when you go onto that site right here, you can go to volunteer resources, and there's a lot of great resources there. And that's a public website. As I said, if you're in Connecticut or Kansas, you can go to that site, and it's a pretty good resource to go to. Okay. Here is, if you're a City of Phoenix volunteer, here's some of the things that we did. We had 14 locations, 223 volunteers that volunteered 8,445 hours. We did almost 4,000 returns and generated almost $500,000 in refunds. So here's kind of an overview of VITA procedures. Clients will come in the door. There'll be a greeter that signs them in and gives them paperwork, this intake screening form, this form 13614C. This is the intake form. They'll give them this form to fill out. They'll fill it out. Sometimes there'll be a screener there. Now, a screener is somebody who is certified in tax law. They've taken at least the basic exam, if not the advanced one. So they can go over their forms and make sure that they've got the right forms. Not every site has a screener there. Sometimes we leave it up to the preparer to do the screening for that. But then that's where you come to the next step, where the preparer will go through all of their documents and go through this form. They're going to interview them. They're going to ask them about how they answered some questions on this form. They're going to prepare a return. Now here, this is really important. Every return that gets prepared has to go through this quality review process right here. That means a second person who is certified at least at the same level as the preparer, same level or higher. They have to do a review of the return and make sure it's right. And they're going to do that review with the person, with the tax client, with the client. It's just like a second set of eyes going through everything. This is what gives us. We have about a 96% acceptance rate. We do really well with these returns. And part of that is because of this quality review process. So now let's talk about that first volunteer standards of conduct. This is talking about the agreement, the volunteer agreement, Form 13615. So all volunteers at the tax site, everybody has got to complete this training. This is what I call the ethics training. There is, when we say ethics, we look at unethical. And what's the definition of that? Meaning, I won't read you this definition, but it's basically saying that you intended to do something wrong. That's unethical. Okay. On the other hand, we don't want to confuse an unethical action with a simple mistake. A simple mistake isn't unethical. And as I told you earlier, everybody makes mistakes. I've been preparing tax returns for 30 years. I can do one. Somebody will quality review my return and find a mistake on it. Okay. It's just, it's too complex. But that's why we do this, why we do the quality review, so that we catch those mistakes. Do that. Here's an example. Mary prepares a return that includes a credit that the taxpayer does not qualify for because Mary didn't really understand the law, or she just made a mistake. She didn't act unethically. However, if she knowingly allows a credit for which the taxpayer didn't qualify, she committed an unethical act, and she violated the volunteer standards of conduct. I might stop right here, and some of you new volunteers may be thinking, wow, and what if I make a mistake on this return and somebody sues me for that? Well, first of all, you're covered by the Volunteer Act, which says as long as you do returns that are within the scope of VITA, meaning you don't go do something that IRS has said is outside of what we're supposed to be doing, as long as you do things within that and you don't intentionally do something wrong, you are covered by the Volunteer Protection Act. You cannot be sued. So be comfortable. Just here's what's important is that you do things that we are trained to do, that's within the scope of that, and you do things with a clear, you do not intentionally do something wrong. That can be difficult sometimes because sometimes you'll get taxpayers in there who just had no idea what they were doing. You get an Uber driver who comes in and they had no idea that all this income was not only subject to income tax, but it's subject to a self-employment tax. And they have a big bill. And you feel bad for them. But that doesn't mean you can go change the return to lower the tax and do something wrong. All we want to do in this program is do an accurate return. We want to get every dollar that's coming back to the taxpayer in refunds, or we want to make sure that they're not paying any more than they're supposed to pay, but that it's accurate. That's what we want to do here. Here's another one. Mary knowingly does not list cash income on a tax return, and Ed, the quality reviewer, just misses the omission. Who's acted unethically? Well, Mary knowingly prepared a false return, and she's in violation of the standards. Ed, he just made a mistake. He didn't notice the omission, so he hasn't really done any. I started to say he hasn't done anything wrong. Well, he didn't knowingly do anything wrong, so he hasn't done anything unethical. Right? It was just a simple mistake. Okay. So the other part of the volunteer standards of conduct is that you will follow the quality site requirements. What are the quality site requirements? And these are the requirements that IRS, when they come in to monitor our site or to investigate our sites, they're going to go through this checklist and make sure the sites are doing this. So we'll just briefly cover these, right? The first one is saying that the preparer is certified, that they've completed all the proper certification tests to do the return that they're working on. Okay. That the site has conducted an intake and interview process, that we use that intake and interview quality review sheet, and we actually ask questions of the taxpayer. Every return has to be quality reviewed. It doesn't matter how much experience you have. Every return that's done at a site has to be quality reviewed. I will stop for 1 second right here. And one of the benefits of volunteering as a site is you can use our software to do your own return. And if you're doing your own return or your family member's return, no, those don't have to be quality reviewed. That's private information. You may want somebody to quality review it. We do this a lot with our friends that volunteer in the program, but you do not have to have your own return quality reviewed. Every other return has to be quality reviewed. Okay. QSR number 4 is that there's reference materials at the sites, that all sites have publication 4012s, that's the volunteer resource guide, and a Pub 17 available electronically. That has to be there. Your site coordinator is going to make sure that that's done. There has to be a volunteer agreement. You've got to have completed the volunteer agreement, and the site coordinator has to have signed that, and that has to be available electronically or at the site. Usually we've now come to where the volunteer coordinator at the City of Phoenix keeps these centrally located, but the IRS then has access to those. Okay. QSR number 6, and this is really to the site coordinator, that they timely file the returns. Or actually, you're going to hear this term called the electronic return originator, the ERO, right? And that's almost always the site coordinator, okay? But they're the ones who have to file their return. QSR number 7 is Title 6. There has to be a poster displayed at the site. Again, your site coordinator is going to make sure of that. But this is telling the taxpayer what their civil rights are, and that. There has to be a site ID number, the correct one. You don't need to worry about that. The site coordinator does that. And then here's number 9 is there has to be an e-file number, the correct one. Again, you don't need to worry about that. Site coordinator does that. And then we all have to exercise security, privacy, and confidentiality. You know, this is when the taxpayer gives us those documents and that information, they're to be used for only one thing, and that's to prepare their return. You cannot take that information and use it or share it with anybody else. It's confidential information. It's called PII, personally identifiable information. And we have to protect that. We have to be careful. Sometimes you're at a site that's kind of close quarters, right? I have kind of a loud voice. I have to be careful when I'm talking to that. And, you know, I might repeat back their bank account number. Well, we don't want the person in the next place overhearing that and making a note of it. Or the screens. We've got to make sure that, you know, that other people can't see the information that we're putting in on the screens. All of us have to be careful of that. So that's QSR number 10. Okay, now we're back to the volunteer standards of conduct. Remember, volunteer standards of conduct number 1 was that we follow all those quality site requirements. Okay, number 2 is we don't accept payment or solicit donations for preparing taxes. Duh, it's common sense. This is free tax preparation. And, you know, you may have somebody offer to, you know, give you a tip. No, you don't take tips. You don't do anything. We don't accept any kind of donation or ask for donations at our sites. Number 3, you don't solicit business. Some of this can be, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, very subtle. You know, the taxpayer says, well, you know, hey, you may sit with the taxpayer and you find out that their return is out of scope. you get kind of talking to them and you find out that, well, they did do a crypto transaction, a Bitcoin transaction. We can't do those. And they're going to say, wow, man, can you at least refer me to somebody? And, some of our preparers there, they may have their own little side tax business. You cannot take a referral from that. You can't help them. And maybe you're just really trying to help the person, but it doesn't matter. You cannot take anybody who's come into this site and do any other kind of business. You can't refer them to a bank to set up maybe you've got a buddy who works at Wells Fargo and they can set up their bank account. You can't do it. Can't refer them to that. You can't refer them to an insurance agent, right? Okay. Oh, it says down here, you cannot ask clients out. Well, okay, duh, you know. Um, Number 4, I will not knowingly prepare a false return. Okay, it's common sense, right? Not counting cash income or listing false dependents, not conducting complete interviews. That maybe you just try to skip over something. Just maybe you're trying to help them out, right? But you can't do it. We want to do an accurate return. Number 5 is I will not engage in criminal, infamous, dishonest, notoriously disgraceful conduct. Or here's the important part, any other conduct deemed to have a negative effect on the VITA programs. This standard is not a standard of a court of law where you're innocent until proven guilty. If you're doing something that even just has the appearance of misconduct, that's going to have a negative effect on the VITA program, and you can't do it. Okay? 6, you're going to treat all taxpayers in a professional and courteous, respectful manner. We do get clients that get upset. And the first thing that I'm going to tell you is you're not being paid enough to deal with a discourteous customer. Stop right there and get the site coordinator. Not that the site coordinator is getting paid any more than you are, but that's their job, is to deal with this customer. You do not have to deal with them, okay? You just want to be polite and say, hang on just a second, I'm going to get somebody who can help you, and turn it over to them and walk away. Okay, sometimes taxpayers, they're surprised sometimes, or they've been told something from some of their neighbors and they're coming in expecting some big refund that they're not getting, or they end up owing a bunch that they didn't expect, and they're just upset. It's not necessarily with you. It's just they're upset and they're taking it out on you. Don't, just be professional and courteous. What are the consequences of not adhering to this, right? They can be barred from volunteering with VITA. Yes, we do have a blacklist, and they can be added to that registry of barred volunteers. The taxpayer is going to be liable for any tax deficiency, and they could seek money from the preparer and the spec partner. That's only if we knowingly do something wrong. Don't knowingly do anything wrong. And what's worse is the partner. And when we say the partner, that could be like the City of Phoenix or Masters of Coin or whoever is the organization who's running these sites. Some of us get grant funding from IRS, and we could lose that grant funding and actually be removed from the program. So you just want to adhere to this too. What if the taxpayer's not telling the truth, right? If you ever get the sense that they're not telling the truth, don't ignore it, okay? We do not have to prepare that return, but it's not up to you to tell that client that. Get the site coordinator, okay? But, what am I talking about? They come in and you prepare a return, and they realize that, hey, they're getting a deduction for charitable contributions. Oh yeah, I made a bunch of charitable contributions. Yeah, what's the maximum I can put down there without doing it? Yeah, put 500 on there. Well, there's rules for charitable contributions. They have to have some kind of documentation if they get audited. Now, we're not auditing them. We don't necessarily have to see the proof, but if we think that they're just making something up, we shouldn't be preparing that return. Okay, so if you're not comfortable with the information, you're not obligated to prepare the return, okay? the taxpayer is ultimately responsible for the information on the return. And they're told that a couple of different times, okay? Usually if I'm preparing the return, you know, and I hear them say something that it doesn't sound like they're making it up, but you know, I'm not sure that they really got the proper documentation. I'm going to tell them, look, if you get audited, you know, you need to go back and create a record of what you gave, you know, put it down in your calendar, because an auditor is going to ask you for proof of this, or go find your bank accounts, right? And make notes of what days you made those charitable contributions, right? And I tell them this, even though I don't think they're really making it up, right? I tell them this because, and then I tell them, look, ultimately you're responsible for everything on the return. I'm going to put down what you tell me. And as long as I don't think that they're really just making it up, I'll put it down, but then I warn them, they're responsible for the return. And then when the reviewer goes over it with them and they print out the return, they're going to sign a form. And the reviewer is going to say, look, what you're signing here is saying you're responsible for everything that's on this return. So you want to, I'm hoping every taxpayer has heard that 3 times before they walk out the door. We're going to treat everybody professionally with courtesy and respect. We're going to safeguard the confidentiality. We're going to apply the tax laws accurately and honestly to the best of our ability. And we're only going to prepare returns that are within the scope of our program. Sometimes a preparer, they get all the way done with the return and find out, then the taxpayer says, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, well, I use the example of crypto. Yeah, I did have I did buy and sell some crypto. We can't do that return. We've got to send them away, even though the return's all done and you may know how to do the transaction. It's outside of the scope of what IRS allows us to do. We don't do returns outside of the scope. We exercise reasonable care in the use of the protection equipment and supplies. We don't accept payment, and we don't download any programs onto the computers that our sponsors have given us to do it. That's a good way of introducing viruses and all kinds of stuff. You know that, but okay. Remember, as I told you, a lot of this stuff is just common sense. So now we can look at the material in our publication 6744, and you're saying, huh? What's 6744? That's the test booklet. Because remember, I told you, it's going to give you all the questions, right? So how do you find that? Let's go look right now into how you access the test. And this is on the Lincoln Learns certification site. So we're going to give you, I will put in here a document that you could download. At the beginning of this, I told you you're going to have 3 different sets of passwords and usernames, and you've got to keep track of these, right? The first one you're going to have, we're going to look at right now, is your Lincoln Learn account. The second one you're going to have, which we'll go over in the next video, is your Practice Lab account. Okay. The third one you're going to have is when you actually get onto a site and you've got the actual login to TaxSlayer, which is the tax program that we use for that. So you want to be sure that you keep track of it using some kind of form like this. I'll put a link to this form that you can use in the video at the bottom. So you're going to go to this site right here, linklearncertification.com. Right there. You'll type that in and you'll get right here. You'll get to a page. You can't see the whole page down here at the bottom, but to get started, you're going to go click on this sign in or create account. That's then going to take you to this page right here. If you are a returning volunteer, you've already created this account, right? And here, let me stop right here. Sometimes I just mentioned ago about how you're going to have 3 different accounts. And I see more people, they get more frustrated because they forgot their passwords or they didn't remember. We've got 4 email accounts and we forgot which one we used. First thing I'm going to tell you is use an email address that you can access on your phone, because you may get to a site and you may forget your password or whatever. All of these sites have a way of recovering your password right here that you can do it. But for right now, we're assuming you're new to this and you've never created an account. You're going to click right down here on create new account. Okay. When you see this, the first thing I'm going to tell you is right up here, your first and last name has to match what's on your government issued photo identification. That's usually your driver's license. You know, I go by Jim, but on my driver's license, it says James. So I need to register here as James Simpson, not Jim Simpson. Your site coordinator is going to want to see your ID and they're going to want to match it up to your volunteer agreement. Okay, so that. Also on this form, notice that there's red asterisks. You have to fill in all of those fields that have red asterisks. Okay, once you fill these in, you're going to click on save. You're going to create a password down here. You can't see the whole thing down here. Yeah, you can't see the whole thing. But down underneath this, you put in your email. Down underneath it, it's going to have a place where you put in your password. And there's requirements for that password. And all three of these sites that we're telling you you're going to go to have different password requirements. That's why I keep emphasizing how important it is to have a system where you record your passwords on this, because it's really frustrating when you try to get into here. Here you're going to notice that the passwords are case sensitive. What else do I need to tell you? So after you fill in these things, you're going to click on save right there. Okay. Then next, you're going to go edit your profile. You're going to put a bunch of information in your profile that's important. Okay. Here you can select the time zone. I think when you click on that drop down one, there's one that's Arizona. You know, we don't recognize daylight savings time. Okay. You're going to put in your organization name. Now right here, this is, these slides were completed by one of our colleagues, Gene, and he's a City of Phoenix volunteer, so he's put City of Phoenix, but you may be working for Mesa United Way or Masters of Coin. Put in the organization here, okay? Years you volunteered. If this is your first year, choose one, okay? If you're a returning volunteer and you come back here, put in the number of years you volunteered and count this year, add one into that, okay? Here where it says professional status, you're going to leave it blank unless you're a CPA, enrolled agent, or attorney. If you are a CPA, enrolled agent, or attorney, you get continuing education credits. And if you click on this, it's going to ask you for a bunch of other information that I won't go over for most of you, but if you are one of these, you're going to know what all this stuff is, your PTIN number and your PTIN card and stuff like that. But that's one more benefit of being a VITA volunteer. If you're a professional tax preparer, you get continuing education credits for this. Okay. Next, you're going to go click on this certifications tab, and this is where you're going to be able to take certification tests right here. So when you go to take this, you're going to see, well, you know, I'm telling you, you need to take your volunteer standards of conduct test and the intake and quality review test. Well, they're not listed here. All you're really going to see is basic, advanced, and I think down here there's two more that say circular 230 and foreign student. We want you to start here with advanced, and once you click on this link right here, it's going to show you the prerequisite test that you have to take before you take the advanced test. So you've clicked on advanced, and then it takes down here, whoops. When you click on advanced, it should take you to a screen that says, whoops, it'll show you the two prerequisite tests that you have to take, okay? One will be the volunteer standards of conduct, and that's what I want you to kind of work at taking before you come back to the next video. If you click on start here, it's going to tell you you've got to take those questions. But here's an example of a question here. For each question, you can select the correct answer and then select the next button to go. So like this question right here, it says a taxpayer offers you a $20 bill because they were so happy about the quality service they received. What is the appropriate action to take? I think you know the answer to that. You're going to select the right answer and then click next. Okay. Some of these questions on here will be fill in the blank questions, and you're just going to click in the field and type in the amount right there, and then click on next. When you're done, this is very important. I said it before, I need to say it again. Okay. Remember, if you pass it, you're done. Although most of you are going to be curious, oh, what did I get wrong? I know I always am, right? So it's going to tell you one time, you only get one shot at this, what you got wrong and what you got right. So you want to be able to get that test booklet out and go through these things and mark the ones you got wrong. It's not going to give you the right answer, but then your site coordinator or instructor will help you figure it out. So in this case, it tells you, hey, you got question 1 of 10 correct. And then you can click on next, but oh, here's one you got wrong, right? So mark it up in your book so that you know because once you go past this, you'll never get back to it again. That's why I'm really trying to emphasize this, okay? After reviewing your answers, you're going to say, yes, I'm ready to submit. And that'll tell you, hey, you got 100%, or it'll tell you that. And then if you don't pass it, you could take it one more time. When you get done with all of your tests, you're going to want to fill out this volunteer agreement. But don't do this part until after you've done all of your tests, because this volunteer agreement is going to say which ones you passed. So that will get you into that. And then while you've done that, what I want you to do before the next video is go in and take that volunteer standards of conduct test. And when we come back here, we're going to start talking about the practice lab. Okay, so with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. This has been a great introduction. We'll get started, and you will have several more of these videos that we're going to get you all ready to come back into a VITA site and prepare tax returns. And I hope I get a chance to see some of you. Bye-bye now.